So, Geoff, being a leading provider of divorce in the country, I guess you're the right person to describe to us what is a divorce.
Well, thanks, Dane, for that kind description. But yes, I can give you a description of divorce in Australia. It's actually used interchangeably in two ways. So when people separate, they talk to their neighbour about getting a divorce, and that can refer to dividing up property, dealing with children's issues, and the whole kit and caboodle, I could say, about separation. The actual divorce itself, though, as referred to under the Family Law Act, talks about the ending of the marriage or the legal ending of the marriage. And when that happens, you have to be separated for 12 months before you can apply.
So, are people able to get the ball rolling in the meantime to start putting things into place to make it easier down the track?
When we talk about divorce, absolutely. I think one of the important things is to try and look at what documents you might need to have at your fingertips so that you can actually apply for the divorce.
Yeah, so what sort of documents are we talking about there, Geoff?
Well, the most important one is the marriage certificate. Now, if you were married in Australia, you can have either the copy from the court registry or you can have your ceremonial copy that you received on the day. They can be hard copies or even a really good photo or electronic copy.
Are there any other documents or anything that you've come across that are required or that may be required depending on the circumstances?
Absolutely. So, look, in a simple divorce, all we need is the marriage certificate, but there are lots of different layers on top of that. So, if you have become an Australian citizen at some point, then we might need your citizenship certificate or passport. If you were married overseas and your marriage certificate's in a different language, we might need a translation. If you're just living in Australia, you've actually got to prove that you've got a right to reside in Australia, and we call that a Vivo search that shows you've got a visa right to live in Australia. And oddly, if you're a New Zealand citizen and have none of those things, but you live in Australia and want to apply for a divorce, we actually need to just prove that you've been living here for 12 months, and usually that will require getting your Medicare card and at least one other document showing you've been here to apply.
Interesting. So you spoke before about a bit of property division or property settlement. Whilst people are waiting for their divorce to pass, for that time to pass, are they able to start looking in at splitting up property and other assets that may need to be divided during that time?
Yes, that's correct. So the timing is up to the individuals. So, in the most simplest of circumstances, the day you separate, you can agree to divide your assets. Some people would get divorced and then want to divide their assets. Some people want to try and get it done first. For example, if you were a mum and dad and you've got some younger children and you've got a house and a couple of cars and some superannuation, it might be the case that after 3 or 6 months following your separation, when things have settled a little bit, you sit down and try and work out about dividing up those assets and whether one party can keep the house or it needs to be sold. So those things can be thought about and agreed, and they can be documented at any time after separation occurs.
Okay, so what sort of time frame can people expect from the divorce process and also with the settlement of their property?
Well, let's talk about the divorce process first. So, as I said, we've got the 12 months we mentioned before, but to actually go through the divorce process, if it's a joint application, which is where both parties want to apply and sign the paperwork together, a divorce can go through in as little as about 6 weeks from the time you file it to the actual hearing. For preparing paperwork that has to do with property, you can probably allow, we suggest about 10 to 12 weeks from the time where you've reached an agreement to get it properly documented, and then lodged with a court if need be, because there are a couple of different ways that you can actually document your property settlement.
So we've spoken about property division. What's the go with superannuation? Because I believe that can also be affected in a breakup.
Superannuation is the new black of property settlement, because since the early 1990s, compulsory superannuation has come in, and since 2003, if I recall, you can now divide superannuation between separated couples. So just like a car or a house, the value of parties' superannuation is an asset that's capable of being divided between them. And it's quite a valuable asset. You may have several $100,000 of superannuation for a couple in their mid-40s or early 50s that needs to be divided and sorted out as to who is keeping which share.
So we've covered some really useful information here, and thanks for sharing that about divorce and property settlement and even superannuation settlement. So let's switch it up a bit now. And can you give us some tips as to how people may be able to help cope when they're going through a divorce? Because it can be quite stressful for people.
Yeah, I do. I really think looking at the black letter law is only part of the equation, and wellness, both holistically, mentally, or otherwise, is really important for people who've gone through the trauma of a separation. So I've certainly done a lot of reading and study, and I'm happy to offer a few tips.
Yeah, what? Give us some tips.
Well, I think one of the things people might say to me is, well, what's the best drug you might want to take after a separation?
Yeah, I'm sure you're talking legal drugs here, Geoff. So what would be the best legal drug that people could take to help them get through a divorce?
Well, if I wasn't sort of joking, I would say penicillin, because if you're sick, you'd like to take an antibiotic. But I think on a day-to-day basis, I think coffee is by far the number one drug that people can use that can help them through their separation period.
Is there a particular time of day you like to have your coffee, Geoff, or is it having a coffee on your own or with people, or?
Well, let's talk about why coffee is good for you, apart from its health benefits. And coffee is one of the great socialising drugs that people have. They sit down with their friends, they have a coffee. I think spending time with friends over a coffee is really important to work through a separation. But coffee has a number of health benefits that continue to arise, and we can see from my reading that we have benefits for your heart. There are a number of other technical benefits, but there are also some issues about when you should or shouldn't have your coffee.
Yeah, and can you elaborate on that?
Sure. In all of my reading, I could say this. Coffee in itself has a bit of a half-life like nuclear waste. In other words, it doesn't just go into your system when you have your cup of coffee and it's gone 2 hours later. So coffee actually stays in your system for about 12 hours. So for some people, that interrupts their sleep, which I also think is pretty important when you're looking at your wellness. So probably coffee stopping around 8 or 9 hours before going to sleep is pretty good. So if you've got an afternoon slump, probably your last coffee around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon would be my recommendation.
Good. Any other lifestyle tips before we wrap this up?
Well, I was going to say about coffee, and people always say, when should you have your first coffee? In the morning. So is it as soon as you get out of bed? Is it 10 minutes later, or is it in an hour later? Interestingly, if you listen to my friend Arnold Schwarzenegger, who talks about this health and things, and he's well-read man. He's happy to have his coffee as soon as he wakes. But there's quite a bit of information out there that suggests that if you allow your body to wake up naturally for about an hour, having a coffee at that stage is actually better for you overall and may not interrupt your body's natural rhythms.
Well, there you go. We haven't just learned about divorce, property settlement, and superannuation settlement. We've learned a lot about coffee as well.
Well, it's been a great introduction to both wellness and the world of divorce and settlement. So I hope we can talk again.
Sure we will. Thanks, Geoff.
Thanks, Dane.